Welcome to our deep dive today.
Oh, yeah.
We're tackling a question that has fascinated historians for ages. Why did some societies just skyrocket ahead while others lag behind?
Right.
Why those differences in development and expansion?
Yeah.
We're going to try to get to the bottom of that.
Okay.
Got some really compelling research,
Huh?
even some really cool stories from history.
I love those.
So,
Yeah, you ready to dive in?
I am totally ready.
Okay.
Let's go.
Let's start by setting the stage a little bit.
All right.
Imagine two groups of people.
Okay.
They're both descended from the same Polynesian ancestors,
Oh,
but they're living on islands hundreds of miles apart.
okay, so same ancestors, different islands.
Exactly.
What happened?
So the Maori,
Mm-hmm.
they were living on the larger, more fertile islands of New Zealand.
Okay,
They had the resources to develop agriculture.
so more resources,
Yeah. And that led to food surpluses,
which means
which means they could form complex social structures.
should sense
Even a warrior culture.
really.
Yeah.
So they had the means to build a more complex society.
Exactly.
What about the Moriori?
Well, they were stuck on the smaller, less fertile Chatham Islands.
Oh,
Yeah.
so not so lucky.
Their environment limited their options.
Uh-huh.
They became hunter-gatherers with a simpler level of technology.
Okay.
And interestingly,
Yeah,
they developed a pacifist culture.
a pacifist culture.
Yeah.
Wow, that's quite a contrast.
It is a big contrast to those Maori warriors.
Yeah, so then what happened?
Well, when the Maori eventually reached the Chatham Islands,
No.
the consequences were pretty devastating for the Moriori.
Yeah,
They just didn't have the military power or the organizational structure to defend themselves.
it's a powerful example of how different environments can lead to very different societal paths.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes you wonder,
Mm.
if something as simple as the types of plants on an island
Right.
could really influence whether a society becomes warlike or peaceful.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does.
This brings us to what are called proximate factors.
Proximate factors.
Yeah. These are the immediate advantages that allowed certain groups, like the Europeans,
Okay.
to dominate others.
All right, let's unpack these proximate factors then.
Okay.
What kind of advantages are we talking about?
Well, one of the most obvious
Yeah.
is military technology.
Okay.
Guns, steel weapons, even horses
Wow.
gave Europeans a massive leg up over many indigenous populations.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine encountering an enemy with guns when all you have are spears and arrows.
Right.
Pretty terrifying thought.
It's almost like showing up to a sword fight with the tank.
Right.
So were there other advantages like this?
Oh, I'm sure.
Think about infectious diseases.
Okay.
When Europeans arrived in the Americas,
Yeah.
they unknowingly brought diseases like smallpox with them.
Oh, right.
These diseases just ripped through Native American populations who had no immunity.
It's crazy to think that something invisible could be such a powerful weapon.
It really is.
So are you telling me that germs played a bigger role in conquest than actual weapons?
Well, it's certainly a significant factor.
Yeah.
But let's not forget about another crucial advantage:
What's that?
maritime technology.
Oh, right. The ships?
Exactly. European ships were far more advanced,
Okay.
enabling them to explore trade and ultimately conquer on a global scale.
So they had the weapons, they had the unintended biological weapons,
Uh-huh.
and they had the ships to take it all around the world.
Yeah, it's quite a combination.
Anything else?
Don't underestimate the importance of centralized political organization
Oh, but
and writing.
writing.
Yeah.
Because,
European states were much more organized and efficient when it came to mobilizing resources
okay,
and administering their territories.
I see.
And writing allowed them to keep records,
Right.
communicate across distances, and build on their knowledge base over time.
So they could basically outmaneuver and outsmart their opponents.
They could?
Sounds like a recipe for dominance.
It does, doesn't it?
But it leaves us with the big question.
What's that?
Where did all these advantages come from in the first place?
Right.
How did some societies develop these proximate factors while others didn't?
That's where we shift our focus from the immediate advantages
Yeah.
to the deeper roots of disparity.
Okay.
And that's where the availability of domesticable plants and animals becomes absolutely crucial.
Right, because agriculture is the foundation of any civilization.
It is.
More food means more people,
Yeah.
which means more specialization and innovation.
Right.
But you're saying that some societies had a head start in the agriculture game.
Exactly, they did.
Okay, so who are the winners in this agricultural lottery?
Well, the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East
Okay.
is a prime example.
Okay.
They just happen to have a gold mine of domesticable species,
Oh, wow.
both plants and animals.
Like what?
Think wheat, barley,
Okay.
sheep, goats, cows.
Wow. The list goes on.
It does.
So they hit the jackpot in terms of farmable resources.
It really did.
And that gave them a huge advantage.
It did. That head start allowed them to build food surpluses, support denser populations, and develop more complex societies much earlier than other regions.
Makes sense. What about a place like New Guinea?
Yeah.
I know they had agriculture, too.
They did.
But their societies didn't develop at the same rate.
Well, they were dealt a different hand.
Okay.
Their domesticable plants were less productive, and they lacked suitable large mammals for domestication.
Oh.
These limitations played a huge role in shaping their trajectory.
So it almost seems like a lottery, right?
It kind of does.
Some regions just got lucky with the plants and animals they had access to.
Yeah.
But is it really just about luck?
Well, there's a fascinating idea called the Anna Karenina principle.
The Anna Karenina principle.
Yeah.
Which sheds light on why domestication isn't as simple as just finding a useful plant or animal.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but what does Tolstoy have to do with farming?
It's based on Tolstoy's famous opening line.
Oh, yeah. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way.
Okay.
This principle applies beautifully to domestication.
All right.
A species needs a whole bunch of specific traits to be a good candidate.
Like what?
Diet,
Uh-huh.
growth rate,
Yeah.
breeding habits, temperament,
Right.
social structure.
Wow. So many things.
I know, and if a species fails on even one of these,
Yeah.
it's probably not going to make the cut.
So it's like a checklist for domesticability.
It is.
And if an animal doesn't tick all the boxes, it's a no-go.
Pretty much.
But I'm still curious about how this principle plays out in the real world.
Okay.
You got any examples?
Think about why horses were domesticated,
Yeah.
but not zebras.
Oh, yeah.
Zebras are notoriously difficult to tame.
Really?
Yeah, they panic easily,
Oh.
and they have a nasty habit of biting.
No, thanks.
And why did Eurasian wild pigs get domesticated while American peccaries didn't?
Oh, right. Yeah.
Well, peccaries lack the social structure that makes pigs relatively easy to manage in groups.
So it's not just about finding an animal that's big and strong.
Right.
It's about finding one that can actually live and work alongside humans.
Exactly.
That's a completely different way of looking at it.
It is, and it highlights those often overlooked factors that determine which species became our partners in building civilizations.
Wow, that's amazing.
But having the right raw materials is only part of the story.
Right.
We also need to consider how those innovations and ideas spread.
Okay.
And that's where the concept of diffusion comes in.
Diffusion, like spreading butter on toast.
You could think of it that way.
Okay.
But in this case, we're talking about the spread of innovations, technologies, and ideas from one society to another.
Okay, I'm with you.
And this is where geography plays a starring role.
Okay.
Think about Eurasia
Uh-huh.
with its massive east-west landmass.
Right.
Crops, animals, and ideas could spread easily across similar climates, leading to faster development and innovation.
So they have this built-in highway for progress.
They did.
What about the Americas?
Well,
weren't they at a disadvantage?
They were. Their north-south axis meant that anything trying to spread had to adapt to drastically different climates, making it much more challenging.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then there were those massive geographic barriers.
Oh, yeah.
Like the narrow isthmus of Panama and the deserts of North America.
So they had roadblocks instead of highways.
Yeah, pretty much.
It makes you wonder how different history might have been if the Americas had an east-west axis like Eurasia.
It's a fascinating thought experiment.
It really is.
And it highlights how geography can influence the flow of information and the development of societies in really profound ways.
This is already giving me so much to think about.
Good.
And we've only just scratched the surface. I'm definitely ready to dive deeper into this.
Well, hold on tight, because in part 2, we're going to zoom out and look at how those environmental factors we've been discussing played out on a grand scale.
All right, I'm ready.
Across different continents.
Bring it on.
Welcome back to our deep dive into why some societies thrived while others lagged behind.
All right, so last time we were talking about those crucial proximate factors.
Oh, you mean like guns, germs, and steel.
Yeah, and how those advantages, they weren't just random luck.
Right.
They came from deeper roots.
Yeah, remember those domesticable plants and animals?
Oh, yeah. They played a huge role.
They did.
In shaping the trajectories of different societies.
Absolutely. And now we're going to zoom out.
Okay.
And look at how those environmental factors played out across different continents.
Okay, I'm ready for the big picture.
All right.
Where do we start?
Let's rewind the clock back about 40,000 years.
Okay.
And imagine an archaeologist trying to predict which parts of the world would develop the most complex societies.
Okay.
What do you think they'd look for?
Well, if I were that archaeologist, I guess I'd look for places where humans had been around the longest.
Okay.
More time for innovation and all that.
Makes sense.
Maybe even places with lots of different groups of people.
Right.
Wouldn't that lead to more diverse ideas and technologies?
That's a good starting point.
Okay.
So our archaeologists might look at Africa.
Okay. The birthplace of humanity.
Exactly. After all early humans had been evolving and adapting there for millions of years, longer than anywhere else.
Right.
They might also notice that Africa has incredible human genetic diversity.
Oh, wow.
Which could be a recipe for innovation.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But didn't we talk about how the Americas were actually the first continents to be fully populated by humans?
Oh, you're right.
So maybe they had a slight advantage with their early start?
You're right. They did have a head start.
Okay.
And the Americas are huge.
Right.
Which means more space for different societies to develop and experiment.
Okay.
But then there's Eurasia.
Eurasia.
The biggest continent of them all. It's got a long history of human occupation and an incredible variety of environments.
Right. From fertile plains to towering mountains.
Yeah, exactly. So many possibilities.
So many.
It's like trying to pick a winning horse in a race with 100 contenders.
Right.
How could our archaeologists possibly predict which continent would come out on top?
It's a tough call.
It is. But one thing they might notice
Yeah.
is the distribution of large mammal species.
Okay.
And this is crucial because those large mammals are potential candidates for domestication.
Right. The key to unlocking advanced agriculture.
Exactly. And all the benefits that come with it.
So which continent had the most promising lineup?
It turns out that Eurasia was the undisputed champion in this department.
Really?
Yeah, it had a whopping 72 different species of large land-dwelling mammals suitable for domestication.
72. Wow. That's a lot of potential partners.
It is a lot of potential partners for humans to work with.
That's amazing. Africa comes in second, though, right?
Africa came in second with a respectable 51 species, while the Americas unfortunately lost many of their large mammals to extinction thousands of years ago.
Oh, that's too bad. So Eurasia was like a supermarket for animal domestication.
It was, but hold on.
Yeah.
Didn't we learn that not all animals are created equal when it comes to being domesticated?
Right. The Anna Karenina principle?
You're exactly right.
Okay.
Just because Eurasia had a lot of options doesn't mean they were all guaranteed winners.
Right.
Plenty of large mammals in Africa and the Americas never became domesticated.
Right.
Even though they had close relatives in Eurasia that did think zebras versus horses, or those American peccaries that never quite made the cut.
Right. So those Eurasian animals had something special.
They did.
That made them better suited for domestication.
They did. It all boils down to those specific traits that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Those Eurasian animals were the ones that happened to have the right combination of diet, growth rate, temperament, mating habits, and social structure to make them compatible with human needs and lifestyles.
So it's not just about finding a big, strong animal.
Right.
It's about finding one that can actually thrive in a human-dominated environment.
Exactly.
It's a bit like finding the perfect roommate.
That's a great analogy.
Right.
It really highlights the importance of that specific compatibility between humans and animals in the long history of domestication.
That's amazing.
But let's not forget about the plant side of the equation.
Oh, right. We've been talking a lot about animals.
Yeah.
You can't build a civilization on animal power alone.
You can't. Those early farmers needed their crops to...
Exactly. So what was happening in the plant world
Right.
while all this animal domestication was going on?
Yeah. Did Eurasia have an advantage there too?
I don't know. You tell me.
You bet.
Okay.
Remember those large-seeded grasses from the Fertile Crescent that we talked about earlier?
Oh, yeah. Wheat and barley?
Yes. They turned out to be superstars in the world of plant domestication.
What made them so special? Were they easier to grow or something?
In a way, yes.
Okay.
They were incredibly adaptable and required relatively few genetic changes to become productive crops.
Interesting.
With just a few tweaks to their seed dispersal and germination patterns,
Okay.
they were ready to feed a growing population. It's like they were practically designed for agriculture.
Wow. It's amazing how those early farmers figured out how to manipulate these plants
I know.
to create such bountiful crops.
Yeah.
It seems like those Fertile Crescent folks were really ahead of the game.
They were, and those cereal crops, along with other domesticated plants from the Fertile Crescent, spread like wildfire across Eurasia.
Why so fast did they just pack up those seeds and take them everywhere they went?
Well, remember that massive east-west axis we talked about?
Oh, right.
That played a huge role in the rapid spread of agriculture. Crops could travel vast distances without having to adapt to major changes in climate or latitude.
So no need to wait thousands of years for new varieties to evolve.
Exactly. They could just plant and go.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And as those crops and farming techniques spread, we see the emergence of larger, denser populations, specialized labor, and ultimately more complex and organized societies.
That's the pattern.
This is making me look at my morning toast in a whole new light. I never thought I'd be so impressed by wheat and barley.
They're pretty amazing.
But I'm curious, we've been talking a lot about Eurasia.
Yeah.
What about the other parts of the world that developed agriculture independently, like the Americas?
You're right. The Americas had their own agricultural revolutions. They didn't have the same head start or the same variety of domesticable species.
Right.
But they still achieved some incredible things.
Absolutely. They domesticated corn beans, squashed the famous Three Sisters.
That's right.
Those crops form the foundation of many sophisticated civilizations in the Americas.
Absolutely. And the process of domestication in the Americas is a fascinating story in its own right.
Yeah.
But even with their ingenuity and innovation, they face certain limitations that shape their development.
You mean those geographic barriers that we talked about earlier?
Exactly. That pesky north-south axis and those deserts and mountains that made it so hard for things to spread.
Right. So while the Americas had their own centers of innovation, those innovations stayed relatively isolated compared to what was happening in that Eurasian superhighway of exchange.
Right.
It's like they were playing a different game altogether.
It's a great way to put it, and it really highlights how geography can act as both a facilitator and a barrier when it comes to the flow of information and the development of societies.
Okay, so we're starting to see how those initial differences in domesticable species and the ease of diffusion played out over thousands of years.
We are.
Leading to some regions having a head start in developing those crucial proximate factors.
Right.
But I'm still curious about how those advantages actually translated into things like guns, germs, and steel.
Okay.
Can we dig a little deeper into that connection?
Absolutely. That's where things get even more interesting.
Okay.
Those proximate factors become increasingly important as we move closer to the modern era. And they really highlight the interconnectedness of environmental factors and human history.
So it's not just about having the right plants and animals.
It's not.
It's about what you do with them.
Right.
And how those initial advantages can build upon themselves, creating this kind of snowball effect.
That's a perfect way to describe it. Think about guns and steel, for example.
Okay.
Remember how the availability of metal ores varied across the globe?
Right. Some societies had easier access to metals like copper.
Exactly.
Which gave them a head start in the whole metalworking game.
Right. And those early experiences with metalworking laid the foundation for more advanced technologies down the line.
Okay.
Eventually leading to the production of steel and eventually firearms.
Wow. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
So guns and steel weren't just sudden inventions.
Yeah.
They were the culmination of thousands of years of experimentation and innovation, all stemming from those early advantages in metal resources.
That's right.
It's fascinating to see how those seemingly small differences can compound over time.
It is, and it underscores the importance of understanding those deep historical roots when we look at the inequalities and power dynamics of the modern world.
Right.
But let's not forget about those invisible but potent weapons.
You mean germs?
Germs. We talked about how Eurasian diseases ravaged Native American populations.
Right, but I'm still curious about why Eurasians were the ones carrying all those nasty bugs.
It's a good question. It wasn't deliberate, of course.
Right.
But it certainly had a devastating impact.
Yeah, it seemed like they had a whole arsenal of diseases that they unleashed.
They did. And the reason for this disparity in disease immunity lies in our old friends.
Let me guess. Domesticated animals.
Domesticated animals.
Hold on. You're telling me that cows and pigs are responsible for smallpox and measles?
Not directly, of course, but they played a crucial role.
Okay.
Remember that close contact with animals, especially livestock, exposed humans to a whole new world of microbes?
Oh, right. Those animals were walking petri dishes of bacteria and viruses.
Essentially, yes. And over time, as those animal pathogens jumped to humans, they evolved and adapted, becoming many of the infectious diseases that we're familiar with today.
So it's like a byproduct of domestication.
It is.
More domesticated animals meant more opportunities for those animal diseases to make the leap to humans.
Exactly. And over generations, Eurasians built up some immunity to these diseases without even realizing it.
And then when they traveled to other parts of the world,
they
unwittingly unleashed those diseases on populations that had no defenses against them.
Exactly.
It's a tragic consequence of those initial environmental differences that set some societies on a different path.
It is. It's a sobering reminder of how interconnected human history and the natural world truly are.
Yeah.
But there's one more proximate factor that we need to revisit.
What's that?
Writing.
Yes, writing. It seems so basic now.
I know, right?
But I can imagine how groundbreaking it must have been for those early societies.
It was a game changer.
Yeah. It's like going from sending smoke signals to having instant messaging.
Writing allowed for record keeping, communication across vast distances, and the accumulation and transmission of knowledge.
Wow.
These were huge advantages when it came to organization, administration, and cultural development.
So having writing meant you could build bigger empires, manage more complex societies, and learn from the past more effectively.
Exactly. And those advantages fed into each other, accelerating the development of certain societies and giving them an edge over those who lacked this powerful tool.
Right. But it's important to note that writing, like many complex technologies, wasn't invented everywhere independently.
It wasn't.
Right. I remember we talked about how it spread from its origins in the Fertile Crescent to other parts of Eurasia, riding that same wave of diffusion that carried those domesticated plants and animals.
Exactly. And that diffusion of writing was heavily influenced by those same geographic factors that shaped the spread of other innovations. Eurasia, with its east-west axis and interconnectedness, once again had an advantage.
So it seems like that interconnectedness was both a blessing and a curse for Eurasia.
It was.
It facilitated the spread of both beneficial innovations and those deadly diseases.
Precisely. And as we move into the later stages of human history, we'll see how these interconnected environmental factors continue to shape the destinies of societies across the globe, leaving a legacy that is still felt today.
This deep dive is already blowing my mind. I can't wait to see how this story unfolds in the final part of our exploration.
Well, get ready for some more twists and turns, because in part 3, we'll be looking at specific regions. And exploring how those broad patterns played out in unique and sometimes surprising ways.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has.
We've traced the roots of global disparities all the way back to the domestication of plants and animals. And we've seen how those early advantages played out in the development of guns, germs, and steel.
It's really amazing how all those things are connected.
It is.
But now I'm really excited to kind of zoom in a little bit and see how all these factors actually shape specific regions and societies.
It's fascinating to see how those broad patterns we've been talking about play out in different parts of the world. Sometimes in ways you wouldn't expect.
Exactly. So where do we start?
Let's head down under to Australia.
Australia.
A continent often seen as an outlier in terms of societal development. Aboriginal Australians remained hunter-gatherers for tens of thousands of years, while complex societies were flourishing elsewhere.
That's right. So why is that?
Well, we've talked about how challenging the Australian environment is.
We have. It's the driest, flattest, and most infertile of the continents.
It is. And those environmental limitations meant that Australia couldn't support the same population density as other continents. Which limited the potential for developing complex societies.
So fewer people means fewer opportunities for innovation and specialization.
Exactly.
It's like the environment itself was putting a cap on their development.
But there's another factor that's often overlooked.
What's that?
The extinction of those large marsupials thousands of years ago. That removed any possibility of developing native animal husbandry. Which was such a key ingredient for societal development in other parts of the world.
So no native cows or sheep to help with farming or transportation. That must have made a huge difference.
It did, and those vast stretches of desert within Australia further isolated different Aboriginal groups, limiting the exchange of ideas and innovations.
It's almost like Australia was a giant experiment
Kinder.
And the effects of isolation on human societies.
In a way it was, and the story of Tasmania, that island off the coast of Australia, provides an even more stark example of how isolation can impact cultural development.
Okay, what happened in Tasmania? Was it even more isolated than mainland Australia?
Tasmania was completely cut off from the mainland for thousands of years.
Wow.
And what's really striking is that their archaeological record shows a pattern of technological regression.
Technological regression.
Yeah, they actually lost some of the technologies that their ancestors had brought with them.
They went backward technologically.
They did.
That's incredible.
They lost the ability to fish.
Wow.
They stopped making bone tools.
Okay.
And their material culture became much simpler over time.
So they basically uninvented things.
Kind of. It's a stark reminder that cultural progress isn't always a one-way street.
Right.
And that isolation can have a profound impact on a society's development.
It makes you wonder what might have happened to other societies.
Yeah.
If they had been cut off from the flow of information and innovation for that long.
Exactly. It highlights the critical role of those networks of exchange and interaction in driving human progress.
Okay, let's move on from Australia then.
Okay.
And look at a region that was much more connected to the rest of the world.
Where do you want to go?
How about China?
China. Okay.
I know they were a center of innovation for centuries.
They were.
Developing things like gunpowder paper and the compass.
Right.
Long before Europe.
They were incredibly innovative, no doubt about it.
Yeah. But they eventually fell behind Europe technologically.
They did.
And that's always kind of puzzled me.
Yeah, this is one of those historical puzzles that continues to fascinate scholars.
Right. So why did China, with its long history of invention and ingenuity, lose its technological edge?
It's a great question. I wonder if it has something to do with those political factors we talked about earlier.
Oh, you mean how Europe's political fragmentation might have actually fueled innovation?
That's one of the leading theories.
Okay.
While Europe was a patchwork of competing states, China had a long tradition of centralized unified rule.
Okay.
And that strong central authority may have actually stifled innovation in the long run.
Interesting. So a single emperor could basically halt the development of new technologies.
Yeah.
If they were seen as a threat to their power or the established order.
Exactly. There are historical examples of this happening.
Wow.
And contrast that with Europe, where if one king or queen resisted a new technology, a rival kingdom might embrace it.
Oh, I see.
Forcing everyone else to keep up or risk being left behind.
So in a way, Europe's political disunity might have been its secret weapon.
You could say that.
Forcing those kingdoms to constantly innovate and compete with each other.
It's a fascinating paradox.
It is, and it shows how those complex political dynamics can interact with environmental factors to shape the destinies of societies.
Absolutely.
This whole discussion has been mind-blowing. It's incredible to think how those seemingly small differences in geography resources and even political structures could have such a ripple effect across history.
It really is, and it highlights the importance of looking beyond simple explanations.
Right.
When trying to understand the complexities of human history.
We can identify those broad environmental factors that gave some regions a head start, but we can't always predict the twists and turns that will unfold along the way.
Exactly. We talked about those cultural idiosyncrasies.
Right, those unpredictable moments that can completely change the course of history.
Exactly like the Japanese decision to isolate themselves from the outside world in the 17th century.
Right.
Or the near success of the assassination attempt on Hitler.
Yeah.
These were seemingly random events that could have dramatically altered the trajectory of entire civilizations.
It's like that chaos theory idea, right?
Yeah.
A butterfly flapping its wings in one part of the world can cause a hurricane on the other side.
A perfect analogy.
And those unpredictable moments remind us that human history is ultimately a story of both grand patterns and individual choices.
Yeah.
Of environmental constraints and cultural creativity.
It's a tapestry woven from countless threads.
Wow.
Each one contributing to the richness and complexity of the human experience.
That's a beautiful way to put it, and I think it leaves us with a sense of awe and wonder.
It sure.
At the incredible journey that humanity has been on.
Yeah.
Shaped by forces both large and small, predictable and unpredictable.
Absolutely. And while we may never have all the answers, the quest to understand those forces and their impact on the world is what makes the study of history so endlessly fascinating.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey through time and across continents.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been an eye-opening exploration of how environment and history have intertwined to shape the world we live in today.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you. And remember, the exploration doesn't end here.
That's right.
Keep asking questions, keep challenging assumptions,
Yes.
and keep seeking out those hidden connections that make our world so rich and complex.
Until next time, stay curious.